Let me, most of you know these gentlemen, I'm sure. Michael Dickinson is well known as a trainer and developed the synthetic surface called Tapeta. He ran his achievement of running 1 through 5 in the Cheltenham Gold Cup was voted the most outstanding achievement in the century of the 20th century in England and Ireland combined. Of course, I'm an old journalist. I can look at the negative. To me, he ran 5 horses and got 4 of them beat, so what's the big deal? But anyway, 5 in a row. Sonny Wiggington is a very distinguished trainer from Keeneland. He has a wide range of experiences in different types of horses. Seth Hancock, who's approaching, of course, is the president of Claiborne Farm. Jimmy Bell, to my left, is manages the wonderful Darley, America now on the same property that was his family's John Bell farm for years. So he's riding high with Bernardini and some of those horses now when he's really having a good season. And Ric Waldman has been affiliated with Overbrook Farm and Winfield's Farm, and has a great deal of experience with top-level stallions and breeding stock, and I've never known him to be quite this reticent, but he doesn't seem to be here. But anyway, I'd like to just jump right into those of you who have been breeding for years and just ask you, do you feel personally that horses you're breeding today are in any way less sound, or is there something about them that you think is less than, say, 20, 25 years ago, Mr. Hancock and Mr. Bell?
I'll start it off. I'd say probably so. I mean, Claiborne Farm owns 35 mares of its own, another 20 in partnership, and of those 55, we'll probably breed 6 or 8 of them a year to Pulpit, who made 6 starts. So, you know, we know he was an unsound horse. We tried to balance that by breeding him to sounder type mares. We have bought Lord at War mares, broad brush mares that we thought would bring some soundness to the pedigree to try to counterbalance that. But, you know, I would say that in that light, yes, that's probably so. But then again, we took a horse called Danzig 20, how many ever years ago, 1980. He only made 3 starts, so you would have thought, well, good gosh, there's no way you can get sound race horses by Danzig, but he got a pretty sound horse. And so, I mean, you know, you never really know till you try them. But if you really wanted to breed a sound horse, you'd go out there and, you know, breed them all to a horse that made 30 starts, won 6 grade 1s at the age of 3, 4, and 5, but then would they make great stallions? I don't know. I kind of doubt it.
Thank you. Jimmy, what's your take on the soundness issue of the horses that you are affiliated with breeding today versus what you were breeding, you know, 20 years ago, say?
Well, the statistics say that they are more unsound, as we've been listening to all morning, getting up to an annual 6 starts. The truth of the matter is, as Seth said, in your mind, you think every year you're raising sound horses, you're making intelligent decisions on your matings, you're trying to control all the factors that you can control, and at the end of the day, you look up and these horses are making less starts. You know, is it the chicken or the egg? Is it really from the genetics and the breeding and the raising these horses, or is it at the racetracks? And there are so many variables that have changed, and the business is just, you know, probably that's it. It's gone from a sport into a business, and there have been a lot of pressures in these last 4 years at the races and what horses have to do. So, you know, I think there's no single factor, but I certainly think that, in my feeling, that yes, there is. We've commercialized the breed. We've gone from really trying to raise horses to race, not being more general, to try to raise horses that are going to look good in the sales ring, and so I think a lot of decisions have been made with the money in mind, and I think that has been a weakening to the overall breed. Yes.
Thank you. Rick, would you like to weigh in on that? You've been involved with a lot of horses and representing a number of people.
Since I came in late, let me hear the whole question again.
Well, I'm sorry. What we're asking is if you have a feeling that the horses that you're breeding or that you're affiliated with breeding, do you think that there's any lessening of the quality and specifically the soundness and durability of the horses that you are, quote, turning out today versus what you were 20, 25 years ago?
Well, there's no doubt that we are breeding less sound horses, and that's certainly one of the factors with all the statistics that have come out today. I can't blame the commercial market because the commercial market just produces what the buying public wants. And if the buying public would prefer to have slower, more durable horses, I assure you the commercial market would respond. I think if there were no commercial market, and you got to work with me on this, if there were no commercial market at all and everyone just bred for their own outfit, obviously we'd have fewer breeders, but I still think we'd be trying a Danzig. We'd be trying to raise a native at the breeding shed. We'd be trying a red ransom. You know, collectively, I think they probably made 10 starts. Because, as Seth said about Danzig, they're pretty sound. Even though you may have had some unsoundness with some of the raised natives, Firm came from that line, and he's a pretty sound influence. So I don't think there's any one group, there's any one segment that's guilty, but there's no question we are breeding unsound horses. Now how you change the emphasis toward breeding soundness, marketing might be a way of doing it. Employing something like Dr. McElraith suggested, it would give us all a terrible hit. That we'd all have to contribute to something like that, but in the long run, we would be selectively choosing the horses that we inject back into the breed, both females and males.
Thank you. Mr. Dickinson, you have trained in various atmospheres and situations. You've worked out a way now that you're training off the farm. You can control the track probably better than 99% of trainers. What's your take on, if you could just say, okay, you had spent 20 years and trained only at the racetrack, what do you think would have happened in terms of your relationship with the two-year-old racing compared to what you do today, what you actually do?
That was about 6 questions in one.
Yes, indeed.
Just one
yes,
at a time, please.
Okay.
Well, if I'd trained at the racetrack, I'd have gone mad, and I'd have driven everybody else mad. So about 2-year-olds, I love training 2-year-olds. It didn't surprise me about the 2-year-old in training sales. The statistics in Europe come out that if you give a horse short, sharp bursts of speed, that is protective for bone damage later on. Mm-hmm. So I don't think a furlong or 2, on the whole, damages a horse's skeletal system. I think it makes it stronger. Where we get into problems later on when we try to go in 5 and 58 when he's still in June. Mm-hmm. Okay. So what were the other questions?
Well, how do you manage your 2-year-olds now? Do you have a philosophy of trying to get them to the races by summer or later in the year?
Yes, we like to try and race all the 2-year-olds if we can. It just makes it so much easier on their 3-year-old career. Okay.
Sonny Wiggington, we did some statistics last year, found that in 1964, 52% of the foal crop raced at 2. That's now down to 30%. What's your regimen as far as 2-year-olds? Do you like to start them in the spring here at Keeneland, or do you like to wait? And have you changed the way you deal with 2-year-olds?
Well, I've been training 40 years, and in that time I've started 2-year-olds in April at Keeneland, and one of them won, and then I ran back in the dinner purse, and he was second. I don't even try to push those horses. If we get them started in September, that's lucky for us. I see a lot of people that can do it, but I'm just not able to push a horse that early, or I'm doing something wrong. But
Okay. So you've followed that same philosophy for your whole career?
That's just been the way it is, and we've had a lot of luck at Hot Springs by just sitting on those horses. And when we cut them loose out there, we do, it's successful.
Okay, thank you.
I add one more thing.
Sure.
You do have to challenge the horse's structure and the bone density, and you can't do that just sitting still. Like Michael said, 5/8 and 58 is probably very damaging, but they do have to have a strong base to work off of.
Returning to Mr. Hancock at Claiborne, I know for many years you and your father and grandfather have raised a lot of great horses, stood a lot of great stallions. Do you see horses out there in the market that are available for stud that still, are you still able to meet your criteria in terms of the balance of speed and soundness, or is that getting more and more difficult in your mind?
I think it's getting more and more difficult because the marketplace has become so important, and you have to bring in stallions that the marketplace is going to accept, and you can't bring in handicap horses that that might get sound, tough, durable horses. You have to really try to bring in horses with speed. I mean, we had that horse Arch several years ago, and he won one race at 2. He did win the Super Derby at 3, but he was by Chris S. and probably was a distance horse, and we started him out, and he didn't come out smoking, and 3 winters ago, he could have been bought for probably $500,000 because he was just absolutely dead in the water, and we couldn't move him, so we made the decision, well, hell, we'll stand him for $5,000 and cut deals, and maybe we can get some mares to him, and maybe lightning will strike the outhouse. Well, it did. I mean, he got lucky. Pine Islands come along, and Lay Arcs come along, and Aravale's come along, and now he's home and dry, so to speak. He'll get a good book, and he'll go on from here and do well. But he was an eyelash away from, not ever making a track in the sand, and we were just lucky that we got lucky.
Good, good. Jimmy, you have the unique situation. The outfit you work with has such a tremendous capacity and a large stable. Do you think the philosophy of racing at 4 in this country is something that do you recommend that to your stable?
First of all, for their true American involvement, it's just basically overnight. So we're very much in the early stages of developing. But Sheikh Mohammed is probably a racing enthusiast first and foremost, and certainly a sportsman in every regard towards racing. And I think that he enjoys that, and I think he recognizes that as being very important in the overall true testing of horses. But as Seth said, the marketplace and so many other factors do creep into the equation and to the overall thought process. But without the exceptions to the rule, I think that we're looking for our own self as well as for the marketplace to showcase and develop horses that can stay around a little bit. Having said that, there are always going to be situations that dictate otherwise, and the marketplace does have a say in things.
Yeah. Rick, what's I know we've talked about this in the past, and the era of larger books. What's your take on? Do you think you have enough experience with it enough years to make any conclusions? And if not, what do you project might be the effect on the breed of this concentration of more and more horses, more and more foals by fewer and fewer stallions?
Well, it's just making it that much more difficult to save the breed or to reverse some of the flaws that we've bred into the breed over the years, because we're just shrinking the gene pool. It's economically driven, so you can't, if you're one who believes in the market system, you can't argue with it, assuming that all the covers are natural covers, or you're abiding by the rules. And you certainly can't restrict book sizes by numbers. But to some extent, the market system even does that, because there's some breeders who won't breed to certain stallions, or certain farms whose stallions tend to breed a lot of mares. But it's not helping our problem any. And I noticed, I remember a few years ago, Seth tried his damnedest to stand some outcrosses and try to appeal to the breeders who were trying to breed, trying to appeal to breeders who were trying to avoid inbreeding. And I know he struggled with some of those horses, because for the simple case that there are just so few sire lines that are attractive to breeders, and anytime you try to bring a new sire line in and you have to keep that stallion going for 4 years, it's extremely difficult. So I'd love to see the book sizes reduce. I don't see anything in the wind that's going to allow that to happen.
Thank you. Mr. Dickinson, we know you as a trainer, but you're a very well-rounded horseman in many ways. How would you comment on the differences in the type of horse that are sent you today vis-a-vis the big steeplechasers that you used to deal with? And be judgmental about that as well as descriptive, please.
Okay. Well, there's no doubt, and that's why we're all here today, the modern thoroughbred isn't as sound, as durable as it used to be. But a lot of people believe that we had some good horses in the past, but we have more good horses than we've ever had now. We put on the Breeders' Cup every year, and there are 8 races, they're all overfilled, and they're all filled with damn good horses. So I agree with Rick, it's easy to blame the commercial market, but we all want fast horses. And to be honest with you, if I can go and buy 2 yearlings, and one's really good, and the other breaks down, I'm reasonably happy. We all want the good, fast, sexy horse. As a trainer, because we love to blame, when a horse breaks down, we love to blame the track or the track super. And I know a lot of the track superintendents, and most of them, nearly all of them, are really decent men. They try very hard, they're conscientious, and they do a really good job. When we get it's not the racetracks really to blame. Now, it's the modern horse. He's so fast. There was a study in England 2 years ago. The modern thoroughbred doesn't have nearly as much bone as they used to have 20, 30 years ago. So, no wonder we keep Dr. McElraith in business, because our horses haven't got as much bone, they can't withstand it, and we are going to have more chips and fractures. So the answer lies, we hope that the racetracks will embrace modern technology in an effort to fill the gap between the modern thoroughbred and the racetrack. So given the commercial breeding practices, the horse isn't going to change, just as Rick said. Therefore, we have to modernize the racetrack. Back to horses running and not running. I used to run my steeplechasers, and they used to run 3 miles on soft ground every week or every 2 weeks. That was on soft turf. It's not why we can't run them back here in America. It's the hard tracks. It's the damage to the skeletal system. Our steeplechasers, they used to get tired going 3 miles carrying 168 pounds, but they recovered from that in about 4 or 5 days. We obviously used to monitor them, we used to weigh them. And even if they would lose a lot of weight in a race, they would put it back in about 4 days. The reason we can't run back our steeplechasers, our flat horses now, is because of the damage to the skeletal system. It's not fatigue. We have a scale in our barn, we weigh them daily after a race, and most of them put on their weight back in 2 or 3 days. So that's the limiting factor now.
Thank you, Sonny. Do you think that you raise horses, not talking about 2-year-olds now, you've set that out for us, but just in general, do you raise horses less frequently than you used to, and if so, why?
Overfilled races or underfilled races. I've entered one filly here 5 times, I think, and the race hasn't been used. Filled it because it's on the extras. So it cuts down. You try to run more, or it's running as much as you can, but if you don't have the fit, so to get clarified, I guess I run less, but I try to run as much as we can. You just have to fit the book, and I average about 100 starts a year.
With how many horses?
With how many? 12, 14.
Okay. I'd like to get a comment from everybody on, we've talked about the marketplace, the pressures to that shape the game, and I'd like to have people comment on year-round racing. Now, obviously, year-round racing has been with us for many, many, many years, and the fact that it's there doesn't mean you have to race each horse year-round, but just in general, how does the year-round major racing fit into the equation of all that we've been talking about? Rick?
Well, I'm for one in favor of year-round racing. I think if for a number of starts per year is on the decline, it would seem to me that if you restrict the number of days racing, then your number of starts is going to decline greater. And as Dick said earlier, that the horses need more time to recover, perhaps mentally, from a race, and they need more time between races, then I honestly think you have to allow the owner who's paying all these training bills an outlet to run his horse in December, January, whenever your downtimes might be. You have to give the owner a chance to run. Otherwise, he's going to be paying training bills for a couple of months at $100 a day or whatever they are. And I don't see a downside to that. But maybe some others have a better argument than I do. Let me make one comment. I know this is off the subject, but it is a concern. It is a concern of mine that, and I think the artificial tracks that we're now seeing are they've been applauded by all, and the statistics, early returns seem to bear out what everybody's been claiming about them. My concern is that all that's going to allow us to do is to defer to a later date this same problem that we're running into now that brought on the advent of the artificial tracks if the breed doesn't change. We will take an unsound horse who was unsound on the artificial track but was the fastest horse that ran on the artificial track, and we will inject that horse back into the breed. And this isn't going to happen in the next 5 or 10 years or next 20 years, but in due course we're going to look back on it and say all the artificial tracks was just an extended lifeline to the breeding industry to continue doing what they're doing. So while that component of the game has come up to speed and satisfied what we need about our concerns about racetrack safety, we still need to put pressure on ourselves as breeders to make some changes in the breed so that we're not facing this again in 20, 30, or 40 years.
Thank you. Jimmy, you have a comment on year-round racing?
Very roundabout one. I think anytime you sacrifice quantity over quality, at the end of the day, you're going to probably have a lesser desirable product. Not only is this gathering about the welfare of our horses, but I think we probably need to tie in the welfare of our owners, which is a concern to me. And as long as we have the business model of our industry whereby the money, i.e. the sales, we are paying more for the potential than we are paying for the performance of horses. And so really we sort of got the tail wagging the dog a little bit, that really if we had a better racing product, we would have more people interested in betting, we'd have a higher handle, you'd have larger purses, and then all of a sudden the economics of owning a racehorse seem to make a little more sense. So to just say is year-round racing good or bad, I think it has to be taken in the whole context of what sort of overall product are we putting out there as we compete for the entertainment dollar, as we compete for the interest of owners wanting to take this tremendous risk, which we know the statistics don't look all that encouraging, but you know, those that do, you know, it's a long ball. If you happen to hit the long ball, it can be very rewarding, but the quality of the product is very important to me as it relates to how we fit into the overall scheme of interest from the entertainment dollar to build a better platform so that if we could ever make these horses more viable for their performance versus more viable for their potential, I think we'd have A, a better product, B, more owners, and C, probably the year-round aspect would work out because we'd have a better quality product.
Seth, to sort of change the conversation briefly, it always seems to me that with and purses increase, they're dramatically up over the years, and yet there's always something that generates such extraordinary wealth in stallions that even the larger purses of today don't prompt people to keep horses in training at 4 and 5 very much. Do you see that as just something we have to live with, or do you think that there is a mechanism whereby our top horses could be induced to race longer?
No, I think it's always going to be that way unless purses just went through the roof. You know, you got the injury factor, which is why we're all gathered here, and the fear of the injury factor, so that weighs into a person's decision about whether to go on as a 4-year-old or a 5-year-old. You know, you've got the insurance costs that you've got to bear, which, you know, if it's a very valuable horse, you can't even make the insurance costs off of what the purses are. So it's a problem that's with us, and it's not going to go away, I don't think.
Thank you. We are sticking to our program very well now. There's been some questions that have been brought up. Andrew, Dan, do you have those? I'd like to keep this panel here, please, and we might throw some questions to some of those who've already spoken. Okay, excuse me. Could I have this mic, please? Okay. Does anyone on the panel believe that increased starts per horse would affect the interest of the sport among the public and increase TV viewing and so forth? Does that resonate? Do you think that increased starts per horse, presuming you'd be able to follow a horse's career better, would that be helpful?
Yes.
You think? Okay.
There's an old horse in England called Persian Punch, and he's not the best horse that there's ever been. He's 10 years old, but he wins a fair few graded stakes races. He shows up 8-10 times every year, and he loses more than he wins, but he's very popular. If they can get him to go, they can put 2,000 people on the gate. The people love their old favorites.
Good. Here's a question. Does the elevation on the racetrack turns affect the soundness of horses? And have any of the studies been done to support that, whatever the opinion is? Any of you, Dr. Peterson, would you like to talk about, this is elevation of turns on racetracks, including the artificial surfaces?
Yeah, this is a risky device I've got here. Well, I think the elevation of turns, there's been some work, actually pretty extensive work that's been done with harness racing, but the equivalent is a lot more difficult with thoroughbred racing because the horse has an ability to adapt their gait to a surface. The other issue that's come up and that's I think has driven this question a lot in the past is also maintaining the fairness of the surface. With large super elevation to the banking, you lose material to the inside rail, and so the inside rail can get deep and slow. And as we've stolen here today from everything, including human medicine, for some of the ideas, but if you look at what happened to greyhound racing, when they went to larger banking, the tracks got so that a leading dog would drop back, the closers would start, would have an advantage, and you'd get the deep track towards the inside rail, and then that would deteriorate over time. I think we've got the tools are gradually developing to look at both the biomechanics of this, which is a three-dimensional problem, also looking at the issue coming out of the chute, the transition. I know some tracks are quite concerned about the transition coming out of the chute, going across a banking, and then dropping back down into the straightaway. So as far as I know, and I pass it off to anybody else who knows, there's nothing that's been done that's extensive or definitive in thoroughbred racing.
Thank you. Here's a question. Does moisture in the track surface affect the safety of racing horses, and how many tracks monitor moisture level of racetracks? Mr. Dickinson, would you like to?
That's a dirt track, and I'm a synthetic now.
Oh, okay, he doesn't want to talk about dirt. Okay. Does anyone have a comment as to moisture, the importance of moisture for the safety aspect?
At the risk of hogging the microphone,
Sure.
With a traditional track surface, the shear strength is dependent on the clay, and the clay becomes ineffective for providing the shear strength if it isn't kept at a very consistent moisture content. Even with a purely sand track, though, it's an issue. And anyone who's walked on the beach is familiar with the fact that if you walk very close to the water, it's more work. If you walk very high up in the dry sand, it's more work. And there's an optimal point where it's like hard between the two, where that optimal moisture content makes a hard running surface. On a horse racing track, we don't actually want that hard surface. That would be the risk of fractures would be in that area where it's really easy to walk on the beach. We want to be a little bit to one side or the other. So yes, the moisture content matters. It can affect both the shear strength, which will tend to lead to soft tissue injuries, as well as the hardness, which can be, in my simplified engineering world, the fracture risk.
Okay. Here's one I'd like to address to Dr. Arthur and anyone else who's has been or is a racing commissioner would like to comment. How feasible would it be to ban the use of corticosteroids?
Actually, we've been trying to evaluate this issue in California, not ban them altogether, but restrict their use at a particular time. The technology may be available in terms of drug testing. They do a similar sort of a evaluation in human athletics where the amount of steroid is limited to a particular factor. It'd be a little bit complicated. There is a rule in New York where you can inject within 5 days of racing. How effective that is, I really don't know, but we just had a meeting in California where trying to extend out the entry time so that horses would not be injected right onto a race, which may have some benefit in itself. We are going to try to develop a system where we can actually correlate intra-articular injections to injuries. How effective that'll be, I don't know, but it's something that people are looking at. Probably won't be easy to do. I think this gets into one of the issues of people understanding what the risks are of certain procedures and making sure owners participate in that as well as the trainer and veterinarian.
Thank you. I think this is for Dr. Bramlage. It says, surely, yeah.
Well, I think it's just important before we, and I've beat this drum before, but we can't generalize with all corticosteroids. There's some that cause damage, and we know which ones they are, and there's some that don't, and they're important parts of our treatment armamentarium. And then there is no data that supports any of the corticosteroids promoting bone injury. In other words, having deleterious effects. So I'm not arguing against the idea of restricting their use, but I think we just can't tar them all with the same brush. We've got to be very careful when we're discussing that.
Okay, thank you. I think this is in response to Dr. Bramlage's presentation. It says, if decreased life starts is influenced by accessibility to races, are you suggesting we need more races and more racing?
Well, it's an economic problem as much as it is. If the industry drove it, then we would have more races. I think the scenario is that the pipe at which we're sticking the horses through is smaller than the population of horses that we have. We have people pulling horses out of the pool on the one end with injuries. And we have horses being pulled out on the other end with no talent. Either they're not economical or there's a certain segment, especially in fillies, that you don't want to race poorly because it decreases their value, and then so they never try racing at all because there's no reward for trying and failing. There in fact is some disincentive. So more races, I'm not sure if they would solve the problem, because remember that graph that I showed you in the end where the number of horses came down, the number of starts hasn't gone back up to the same degree. So in the last few years, there's some sort of disconnect there that you can't look at purely statistically with the number of horses. So I think all the factors we talked about, I'm not totally sure that a larger number of races would solve the problem. And I'm pretty sure that looking at the data, that we will never have full fields. I mean, like there will never be consistently 14 horses in a field, because if you look at the statistics, that somewhere in the 8 to 9 field range is where it's been for years. 8 to 9 horses in a field is where it's been for years. If you look at the New York and California data where they have higher entries, they get higher numbers of scratches. So like the note I said, there's not a lot of demand, especially now with the economics of racing, to be 30 to 1 on the morning line. And so the data supports that people come out of those races and race someplace else. So a larger number of races, I think, could happen. I mean, it could help that problem, but if a larger number of races were economically feasible, we would go there automatically.
Here's one I'd like to throw open to everybody, both from the layman's point of view and the veterinarians. Do you have the feeling that horses are born with pre-existing bone issues? And if so, would it be wise to subject a horse to an MRI at birth? Any of you breeders have a sense, looking back at horses, did you have the sense that, gosh, I never had a chance with that horse because of the way he was born, or not? Oh, excuse me, there's a mic from there.
I think it's more of a scientific question, and I'm no scientist, but my lay interpretation is that many are born with predisposition to a bone injury. And if you could withstand the economics, you in effect could do what Dr. McElraith suggested at any stage. But I mean, you look at the economic considerations here, and you're in effect selectively breeding because you're in effect throwing those horses away. But it would help the breed in the long run, and everyone would be participating in the cost of that, but the cost would be significant and would turn the market down for a while until it could recover, and then it would recover and become healthy again. That's my lay interpretation. I may be off base, and somebody correct me.
Anyone here, any other? further comments?
All I would say is I've seen a few ugly ducklings early on that turned out to be some pretty good swans. It'd be a little hard to, I'm sure there's the extreme situation in the cases that, but Mother Nature and time and some good green grass has cured a lot of ills early on. But when you get into some true predisposition or true bone problems, I'm sure there's a case to be made. But I wouldn't want to be judge and jury too quick.
Seth, just okay. Seth, you want to comment on that? Okay, now, Dr. Bramlett.
I'm sorry. You can't lose sight of the fact that the making of a racehorse out of a yearling is a work-specific adaptation. So if you did an MRI on all the horses that were born, looking for the bone defect that's going to lead to injury, you'd waste your money. The thing they inherit is the ability to adapt to the workload. And there are some horses that just can't do that due to their conformation, their constitution, whatever the factor is. And there are some horses that their speed, that's another aspect. If you're too good, your skeleton can't handle it. But it's a work-specific adaptation, which is why people say, commonly to us as veterinarians, well, this artificial surface is going to put you out of business. I'm not particularly worried because we still have to adapt the horses to the speed they got to go.
Okay, here's one other that's philosophical and also veterinarian. I guess you can be both. Can you breed a fast horse and at the same time you are breeding out osteoarthritis? That presumes several things. One is that you could breed out osteoarthritis, but is there, I think you kind of just answered that, there isn't any barrier to a healthy horse being fast.
Well, a couple of comments, just what Larry said is very appropriate, and the second part, not answering the question directly, but further comment to the earlier question, is that the yearling radiograph study is a good example. Like, you don't want to be doing MRIs trying to find problems, because that's what got us into trouble with radiographs at yearling sales initially, and the biggest thing we achieved with the yearling radiograph study was identifying things or lesions or issues that people were turning horses down on the basis of was, that weren't significant. So we identified a set of radiographic changes that experienced veterinarians knew were not an issue, or experienced trainers, but not everybody did, not the general population. So then you go to the next step, and a very prominent buyer said to me a few years ago, I don't care about OCD, Wayne, but I do care about you predicting if the horse is going to fracture or not. So that sort of gets into the question. So if you lump OA and fractures all together, yes, there's going to be, we are ultimately going to identify defects in certain lines that will predispose to osteoarthritis or fracture. And then you get the political fallout from it, as Rick has alluded to. It's going to be and I don't think the industry is going to be prepared to pay that price. However, if you can breed it out and you can still harness the speed, people are always going to buy for speed and success on the racetrack. But I think you can, with examination and with things like microarray are going to come along and are going to help us. We just got to use it very carefully, because some genes are linked, and we may find that, anecdotally, we've seen instances of stallions who have had more than their share of OCD, but they've had more than their share of stakes winners. So what are you going to select for? You're going to select for the stakes winners, and the same thing's going to happen with the osteoarthritis. Osteoarthritis is a consequence, as we talked about this morning, of cyclic trauma and wear and tear. You put miles on a horse, and there may be ways where you can have less damaging miles on a horse. We think there are, the fast work being one example, or the short fast work. So I think probably not. We're probably not going to be able to get both, but, there's going to be a balance achieved at some stage.
Well, thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Appreciate the panel and appreciate everyone's participation. Those of you who are invited participants, There'll be lunch in the Limestone Cafe, will be available in a few minutes. Those of you who just came out of interest, we certainly appreciate that and hope you found it interesting, and stay tuned. We will be making a lot of public reports on this and come up with an action plan that we hope we can, we are going to translate this from talk into action, and that's what the next few sessions will help us refine. So thank you very much. Thank you, Seth.